right, everybody. So at this point, we've had, we're about roughly midpoint of the semester. We've talked a lot about HTML and everything that goes into HTML, including, basic using, HTML to set up typography, like the strong tag and the em tag. We've talked about core tags, right? That would be like the HTML head and the body tag, including the title tag. We've talked about container tags. We talked about form tags. That'd be like the form tag or the input. We talked about HTML, talked about hyperlinks and images. So that'd be like the img tag and the a tag. We also talked about HTML5 containers. That includes the, any sort of standard, any tag that kind of structures other tags typically. So that'd be like a header, main, footer, section, article, things like that. Okay. And then we talked about cascading style sheets, also known as CSS. And that included things like setting up typography, or at least basics of typography. So like color, font family, font size, line height, things like that. There's more, but I'm just kind of going through the basics. Background colors, so like background color, background image, anything related to that, background size, Then we got into box model. That would be things like width and height and padding and margin, border. Okay. And so you guys just completed a project where you guys, made multiple web pages, right? And you set up HTML and you stylized it through CSS and things like that. And now what we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester is basically using more versions of CSS to do more complicated layouts and more complicated designs. Okay. So what I want to do is today we're going to kind of talk about a couple different things. Some of them are going to be typographical related. The first major subject I'm going to talk about is a navigation bar. Okay. What is a navigation bar? Well, let's just go to the Diablo Valley website. Okay. A navigation bar is an area that has hyperlinks that go to to major areas of a complicated website. So for here, Diablo Valley, it's like, this is financial aid or, admissions and aid, current students, academics, about Diablo Valley College, right? And if I were to inspect, you would see that all of these are A-links, right? So they're all hyperlinks. Okay. Now they're not, unlike say hyperlinks maybe that are here, these hyperlinks are about COVID or about academic support. Navigation links are really about getting to major, their navigation to take you to major parts of the website. Okay. So that's, Diablo Valley College. Let's go to maybe something like Amazon. Where it still has a navigation bar. Normally the navigation bar is at the top. That's not always true. Sometimes they're on the left. There might be a mobile version where maybe the navigation bar is more on the bottom. It kind of depends. At least for most websites, you'll probably see it at the top. So this is a navigation that takes you to major areas of Amazon, the website, including One Medical. I'm not really sure what that is, but like Amazon Prime, music, books, fashion, pharmacy, so on and so on. So if I click, let's just do a little inspect. Once again, you can see how this is a hyperlink, okay, that's just been stylized with CSS. in terms of margin and padding and font size and things like that. So I can make the text, you can see how the text is growing or shrinking, right? So that's what we're going to be doing, is talking about how to create a navigation bar, okay? To do that, we're going to go back and, I did talk about these concepts before, but I'm going to kind of remind us. It's always good to practice things. So the first couple exercises is how we're going to make a navigation bar, okay? And a navigation bar, first thing we're going to go back over, which we talked about before, but I want to talk about again, is what's called a CSS compound selector. Okay. So to understand what a compound selector is, let's go back over how web pages are structured. Okay. Web pages are structured as what's called a document object model. Okay. This is referred to a lot of times, you might people here say the DOM. Okay. They mean the document object model, and that's how a web page is laid out. Okay. So the way it works is when you have a web page, your browser sort of builds it layer by layer by layer. Okay. The way I like to think of it is like, it's kind of like a Aztec pyramid where it's like, it starts with the base level. That's the HTML tag. And then on top of that are its direct children, which is like the head and the body. And then those have their children, It's kind of hard because you get smaller. In theory, it kind of gets smaller and smaller, but like then there's like a title tag, right? And over here is like the style, and then this becomes, so on and so on. So like, I'm going to do a really quick rough sketch of this exercise 1 in terms of the DOM. Okay. So I'm just going to create a new document here. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to just kind of, if in terms of this page, the sort of core tag is the HTML tag. Everything is inside of that. Remember how, with HTML tags, we can have tags within other tags, right? That's called a nested tag. So we sort of start with the HTML. Okay. I have no color here. Sorry, I'm just trying to figure this out. All right, so there's my HTML tag. It has 2 direct children, which is the head tag and the body tag. So if we go here, it's like head, body. Okay, I'm going to go inside the head section for now. And there's really nothing much inside of it. There is a title tag. And then there's the style tag in this case, which allows me to write CSS. If I go inside of, I'm just going to close this up. If I go inside the body tag, the body's tag direct children are this H1, this div, this H2, this unordered list or UL, this footer, and this P tag. Okay. So I'm just going to go back. So it was an H1. And then it was a div. And then it was an H2. And I'm singing my answers. UL. And then there was a footer. And then there was a P tag. Okay. All right, let's go into these. See, H1 is done. There's no tags within that, so that's done. Let's go inside the div, and inside the div is an H2 and then a P tag. And inside of that P tag is a hyperlink or an A tag. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. So there's an H2 and then a P tag, and then within the P tag is an A tag. Okay, I'm gonna close this up. Inside of this unordered list are 3 LIs or 3 list items. Each list item has a link inside of that. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. Let's just draw this. Zoom out of this bad boy. And then each one of those is an A tag. The footer has an A tag in it, and then this paragraph has an A tag in it. Okay. This would be my document object model, or the DOM. Okay. And the way actually my page, the way my browser, in this case, if I take this page and I preview it in a browser like this, what's actually happening is it kind of built, I really should have drawn it the other way, although I think it's a little more confusing that way. But essentially, it's going to start with this level. So it's going to lay down the HTML first, and then it's going to lay down like the heading, or sorry, the head and the body, and then it's going to lay down like the title. Basically it goes kind of like layer by layer, essentially. Like I said, think of it as kind of like an Aztec pyramid, where it's like you build and you put stuff on that, and you put stuff on that, and you put stuff on that, or think of like a pyramid, or the Washington Monument's kind of built that way, where it's like literally just stones stacked on top of each other. That's kind of what's going on here. Now, what does this have anything to do with this compound selector I talked about? All right, let's talk, what's a selector? Well, remember, a selector selects something in my web page, right, that we're going to stylize using CSS. Okay, that's what a selector is. Compound means to have more than one. So if you have a compound fracture, you have more than one fracture, right, in your arm or whatever it is you hurt, okay? So a compound selector means multiple selectors. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to go back. This is exercise 1, and I'm going to go inside of this tag here. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, I want all of my hyperlinks to be red. So I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to type this, and let's go back and preview. And all of my hyperlinks are red, right? But let's say I didn't want every single hyperlink to be red. Maybe I just want the hyperlinks that are inside of my div to be red. So the problem is that with this tag selector, there really isn't a way to not do that. There's no way to affect just some hyperlinks and not all of the A tags, okay? Now, what I could do is I could make, a link, or sorry, a class, and then I could come into here and say, well, here's this class, because my class is only applied to this one item, it's the only thing that should get affected, right? Now, it's not necessarily a bad way to do it. The problem, though, is that we're not always able to use classes, okay? Or it may not necessarily be the best solution to the problem, okay? So we're going to just learn an alternative way that we can do this. Okay, so what a compound selector means is that multiple selectors must be true for the style to be applied. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say div space A. Space is very important there. Okay, so what is going to happen is it says, well, first, it's going to go through the page and it's going to select all divs. And then it's going to go in each side of those divs that get selected and see if it also has a hyperlink in it. Okay. So if I go back to my little sketchboard here, I have a bunch of A tags, but only one of those A tags is also inside of a div. It's this, let me use a different color. It's this one, okay? These are all A tags, but this is inside of a P tag, this isn't a footer, this isn't an unordered list. None of them are inside of a div. So only one of the requirements got satisfied instead of both, okay? And we need both to be satisfied. So what this is saying is, both of these have to be satisfied. The way I like to think of it is read it backwards. Affect all hyperlinks if and only if that hyperlink is also inside of a div. Okay, either way works, whatever, is easier for you. So now let's do that. And I'm going to set that to green. So notice that there's no classes, no IDs being applied here. But when I do that, I can affect just those hyperlinks. Okay. Now, why would you really want to do that? Well, if you think about it, when you have a complicated website, let's go back to Diablo Valley, it's like there's different styles for different hyperlinks. The way that they've styled their navigational hyperlinks here, because remember, these are all A tags, is different than how they've set up these A tags, right? These are these are bold and not underlined. These are, not underlined and regular font, right? These are hyperlinks, right? So all my hyperlinks here look different. So rather than having to set up all of these special classes, I could just sort of break them up by sections, because the idea is like, well, your navigational links are probably in the nav bar or the nav section. This might be in like a section tag. This might be in an A side tag. So it's like a quick, easy way to stylize multiple things. Okay. Let's say, for the sake of argument, I wanted to affect all of the hyperlinks that are in my footer. Okay, well, I can say footer A, color hot pink. Okay. What this says is first select all footer tags that are in the web page, then go inside the footer tag and see if there is an A tag within that footer tag. Okay. I'm going to save and let's go back and preview. Now it only affects that one because that's the only one where it's both has an hyperlink and then hyperlink is also within a footer tag. So if I go back, if I look at my DOM or my structure of my page, I can see the only one that really has an A tag and a footer is this one. This is the only one. These are all A tags, but none of them else are inside of footers. Okay. You could even do it as many times. You could have, in this last two, I had two compounds, meaning both of these had to be true, but you could do as many as you want. You could have 3, you could have 4, whatever you want. So if I did this, I don't know, gold. Okay. So what this says is find all unordered lists, select all list items that are inside of the unordered list. And then select all hyperlinks that are inside of list items that are inside unordered lists. Okay. Or once again, read it backwards. Affect all hyperlinks if and only if that hyperlink is inside of a list item, if and only if that that list item is also within an unordered list. Okay. So all 3 of these must be true for this to work. So for instance, if I go into here, these all work because they're all list items that are inside of a list, and all my list items have a hyperlink. I'm just going to go in here real quick. I'm going to add a hyperlink that, let's just say, this is a hyperlink. But notice that it's not within a list item. So when I preview this, that one will not get affected because it did 2 out of the 3. It was a hyperlink that was in a list on a list, but it wasn't within a list item. So this did not apply to it. Okay. All parts of a compound must be satisfied to apply the effect. Okay. All right, we talked about this before as well. It's what's called a pseudo class. Okay, a pseudo class doesn't style the the HTML item. It stylizes the state of the HTML item. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to preview this real quick. I have this page here. And I have a bunch of hyperlinks here. And I also have a quick little form that has a button. And what I'm going to do is, let's just say I wanted to stylize all of my links. Okay, I'm going to take all these links and I'm just going to make them red, or let's make them orange. And I'm just going to get rid of the default text decoration that's in the user agent. I'm going to set it to none. Okay. Now I've stylized the A tags, right? Here are the A tags right there. Boom, 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 and boom. And I've said, hey, I'm going to take all these hyperlinks and I'm going to stylize them, right? Now, what I want to do is I want to take my cursor, and when my cursor goes above the hyperlink, I want it to change styles. I want it to change colors or background colors or whatever it is that I want it to do. This is referred to as a pseudo class. Okay. The reason why it's called a pseudo class is it's not tech. So what is triggering it is it's not the HTML tag. It's a state of the HTML tag. So what's a state? Well, it's like if I have this box, okay, my box has two states. It has closed and it has open. Closed, open. Those are two different states, right? Or think about if you have like a fan, like you have a fan, but the fan may have low, medium, and high. Each one of those settings is a different state of the same item, right? Whether the fan is set to low or medium or high, it's still the same fan, right? And so that's what a pseudo class really stylizes. It stylizes a state of the HTML tag, okay? So let's do that. I'm going to come back and we're going to stylize what's called officially the hover state. The hover state, like it sounds like, is when you hover over a hyperlink. So the way it works in CSS is if you're going to use a pseudo class, use the name of the tag first, or it can also be a class. And you're going to use a colon. Colon denotes that we're stylizing a state of whatever is here, okay? Once again, these are you can't just make up a state. The state's already sort of built into the browser. So you just have to know what they are. So like I said, one is called the hover state. What I'm going to say is, well, when I hover over, I want to add, so default is orange. I'm going to change the color to red. So I'm going to come in here. And when I put my cursor, okay, you can see it's changing the hover state to a different color. You can add whatever you want, even things that didn't technically exist in the normal state. So in my normal state, I never really actually defined a background color, but I can define one here if I want. So I'm going to say background color yellow. Okay, so I can do that. All right, so that's a hover state. There's also something called the visited state. Visited is when every hyperlink knows whether or not it's been clicked on, okay? If you click on a link and follow it to the other web page or the other website, and then you come back, the browser knows that you did that, and it basically will say, okay, this link has been clicked on, okay? That is a visited state or visited link, okay? Defaultly, your browser typically makes visited links purple. That's kind of the default of most user agents. But we can set it to whatever we want. So I'm going to say, well, I want it to be green, and I'm going to set the color or the font weight to bold, or let's make it italic. Font style italic. Okay. So I'm going to hit save. Okay, so you can see that it did change my color. So if I click on a hyperlink, like I go to Yahoo, that was the only one that I guess I hadn't clicked on recently. And I go back. There you go. Okay, so you can see that it's working. You may start off, and this may already be visited. To fix that, you can clear the cache on your browser, or you can try running it in a incognito state, or incognito, but incognito tab. So I'm just gonna put all this here. I should work. I should have probably tested this. There you go. So this is like the normal state. I'm in cognito mode there. And now when I click on it and go back, it may actually, because I'm incognito, it may be actually not recording that I'm going to a new place. That might be part of it. So I don't know. Let's do Safari. Why does it keep? Okay. Looks like it's getting the same thing. We already kind of knew what I did. I would probably have to clear the cache in my browser, but hopefully you get the idea there. Okay. So that's a visited. We also have something called a active. Active is for a split. So when you hover over something like this is a hover state. For a split, that only means you've hovered. It doesn't mean you've clicked. Okay. So what we can do is we have what's called an active, and an active means you're literally clicking on it now. Okay, you can actually see this in other websites. An easy website to see this in my opinion, is Wikipedia, where, if I zoom in really far here, so this is like the hover state, this adding of the underline here. Their default color for the text is blue, but when I click on it, it's going to change color for a split second. So I click, see how it's turning gold, and then it goes to the new web page. So that is the active. Okay. So I can set that up here. So I'm going to set it to be, I don't know, hot pink maybe. So I'm going to go back, and when I click, it's going to turn hot pink just for a split second though. So click, see how it turns pink, and then it goes to the website. Click. Click. Okay. Now that was specifically for the A tag. There are other pseudo classes that you can apply. For instance, forms have one. So each of my form is an input. You remember back when we talked about forms. So forms have something called a focus. A focus is whichever form item you're currently working on. Okay. So in other words, like I have 4 of them here. So which one am I working on? That is the quote unquote the focus. Now, most browsers or the most user agents and browsers defaulted to being like a little blue line here. You can see that sort of thicker blue line that's going around. That's actually coming from a border. I can change it to whatever I want though. So maybe I'm going to set it up that the background color turns yellow, and I'm going to change the text color to be red, but only when the input is in focus. So if I click, see how it's now yellow? As soon as it's no longer in focus, it goes back to the normal state. Okay. Not only that, the one that you may use the most is actually pretty much everything has a hover state. So if you really wanted to, notice how I have this button here that has a class called button on it. And I want to set it up that if I put my cursor over it, I want the button to change background color so you can tell that you're hovering. So I'm just going to set it like this, hover. I'm just going to change the background color. Let's make it like, I don't know, light blue. Let's change the text color to dark blue. Okay. So I'm going to save whatever, and then see how I'm getting this hover effect on my button. Okay. All right. So that was compound selectors. That was pseudo classes. The last thing we need to understand before we can kind of talk about how to use CSS to stylize a navigation bar is this idea of inline tags versus block tags. Okay, I know I've talked about this a lot, and to be honest, I'm going to talk about it a lot more in this course. An inline HTML tag is a tag that appears in a line. Okay, examples of inline tags would be like the strong tag, the EM tag, the U tag, basically pretty much any text formatting tag. Hyperlinks are inline tags, so are images technically, or the IMG tag. So for instance, each of these guys here is an inline element, so they can literally exist in the same line. They can appear one after each other in the same horizontal space. So if I click on this, you can literally see how it goes across the page. Okay. Block elements take up a block of space. They are as wide as their parent. Okay. If there is no direct parent, then technically the body or the web page is the parent. So examples of a block element would be like, so these were inline. Examples of block would be basically header, main, basically any sort of container tag, footer, p tags, section tags, all that stuff. I'm not going to go through every single one. And if you want, there is a link, there are links in the module you can click on that would take you to Mozilla, which would list literally every single one. But essentially, the main thing to understand is that block elements, at least by default, cannot exist horizontally together. In other words, you can, by default, there are ways to change this. There is no way to have two block elements together. Okay. So notice these are all headings. Headings also are block elements. This is a block element. This is a block element. Block, 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 block. If you right click and do an inspect, and you click on it, it'll even tell you, see how it says display block? So that actually tells you it's a block element. Or if you go under computed, under layout, it would say display block. Or if it was an inline element, it would say inline. But anyway, the point I'm trying to show here is that my block elements cannot exist horizontally next to each other. They by default go vertically because they take up the entire space here, the entire block. It doesn't matter how much content is in it or not, okay? So first you have to understand that there are blocks and there are inlines, okay? The reason why we care is that, blocks and inlines are different. So what I mean by that is the main thing that where blocks and inlines differ is how they treat box model, okay? For instance, if something is a block element, you can apply width to it, okay? So for instance, these are all block elements. If I wanted to, I could come in here and I could say width equals 500 pixels, okay? And it's going to change that because block elements can take a width property, okay? Inline elements do not use width and height, okay? Right? Inline elements ignore the width and height property, okay? So if I was to come in here and I was to take this EM tag and say width equals 500, and I go back, you'll notice that nothing happens because essentially inline elements don't have a width, quote unquote, or it cannot be affected. So even though I'm applying it, you can see it's kind of grayed out here because it doesn't apply. And it's even probably trying to tell you inline, display inline property prevents the width from having an effect. Okay. It's not just the width and the height property. It's also padding and margin. So for instance, if you take a block element and you apply padding or margin, so let's say I'm going to do margin and I'm going to say 100 pixels, okay? So as we learned in the box model section, when we discussed this, what's going to happen is each item is going to get, 100 pixels on all sides. So 100 pixels above, 100 pixels below, 100 pixels to the left, 100 pixels to the right. Okay. Just going to remove that. Now that's for a block element. Inline elements are a little bit odd in that inline elements ignore left and right margin, but they keep left and right margin, but they ignore top and bottom. So if I come into here, I'm going to take this EM tag and I'm going to say, let's do the same thing, margin, let's just do 50. And I'm going to go back. So if we come look at this, you can see that actually what's happening here is that each of my each of my EMs, which is an inline, you can see the orange part represents the margin. You can see it's applying to the right and to the left, but it's not appearing at the top and the bottom, okay? The reason why they did this is because in theory, elements that are in line are in like a paragraph, and it was okay to move sides of the paragraph, but they didn't want to change the line height between the lines. That's why, in theory, margin is basically ignored. I don't know if it tells you. Yeah, I guess here it doesn't tell you that, but it is ignored on the top and the bottom. Like it is applied technically, but it's not really applying it. All right, so that's, those are just how inline elements and block elements differ, okay? So that's just kind of built into the browser, okay? This is just how the browser works. What we want to do now, though, is we want to say, well, what if I wanted an inline element to act like a block, or vice versa? I want a block element to act like an inline element. So for instance, maybe I want all of these headings here to display in a line, right? Like I said, defaultly, that's not going to happen. But there is a way I could do it, which is we're going to use a new property called display. Display is something we're going to be using a lot in the next couple weeks about. And display, like it sounds like, tells the browser how to display this item. What I'm going to say is I don't want my H2 to act like a block element. I want it to act like an inline element. Okay, I'm going to hit save. And so now it's acting like an inline element. Okay, and since inline elements display in a line, it doesn't matter that normally headings wouldn't do that. Now it's going to display that way. Now keep in mind, now that I've made this an inline element, all of the box, all of those traditional box model properties that don't work or that work for a box, for a block element are not going to work for an inline element. So remember that inline couldn't use width, although blocks could. And so now you can see once again, what's happening here is because I made this an inline, width no longer applies. Okay, same if I had done like margin on the top and bottom, it no longer will apply now that this is an inline element. Okay. I can also do the opposite. I'm going to take this EM tag and I'm going to make them act like a block. Okay, so display block, which means let's make these act like block elements, even if that's not defaultly how this tag would work. So I'm going to go back. Block elements defaultly go the width of the whole of its parent. In this case, the parent is the body or the whole page. So it just goes the whole width. They're not going to be able to be stacked on top of each other vertically, or sorry, on next to each other. They can only go vertical. Okay. Now but one interesting thing is, well, now that this is a block element, all those things that I couldn't do when it was an inline element, like having width or having top and bottom margin, I can now do. So I'm going to give these widths like 400 pixels, and let's apply a bottom or margin bottom of, I don't know, 50 pixels. And you can see now it's working. Whereas before with this inline, that wouldn't have worked at all. Okay. All right, so one thing to note is when we work with a navigation bar, it's basically a bunch of hyperlinks, okay? Well, hyperlinks are actually inline elements. But I probably want them to act, in order to stylize them, I want them to act more like blocks. So here's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the A tag here. And let's make these into block elements. Display block. Okay. I'm going to do that. These are now acting like blocks, which means they can no longer be horizontally in the same row. That's what an inline would do, but these are blocks now. Okay. Now that these are blocks, I can now use a lot of the box model properties that I couldn't use before. So for instance, I could give it a width. Let's give it a width of like 200. And maybe I'm going to use, I want to push the item off a little bit. So it's like a margin right. I couldn't, you could use margins as an inline, but this is just, so that doesn't change, but I wouldn't have been able to set a width before. Okay. Actually, let's do this as margin bottom. Okay. So here, what if I wanted something that's kind of like this, where I want to have an element that's kind of like a block and that I can set its width and I can set its, I could put like margin around it, but I also want it to go in a line. Okay, so really what we're trying to do is create like a hybrid. We're kind of trying to combine the block and the inline. Well, guess what? There's something called an inline block, which is basically a hybrid between the two, which is the element is a block element, meaning I can use things like width and height and using margin and whatnot, but also it will display in a line. So what I'm actually going to do is go to here and I'm going to say, let's make this an inline block. Okay. I'm going to give this a width of 200. All right, so you can see that this is my width, right? So now they're starting to act more like, actual navigation bars. So I'm going to maybe make it 100 instead of, and let's throw a little bit of padding on it. All right, maybe I'm going to get rid of those underlines and give it a color. Let's make it red. And I'm going to set the text to the middle of my container. All right, see that's starting to look more like a navigation bar. Okay, so these are all inline blocks. I could reset the width, which I couldn't do when it was an inline element. So I could make it 125. And if I want to space them out and use a little margin on it, maybe just on the one side, the right side there, I'm pushing it away. Okay, so this is, I've talked about all of this before. This is just kind of a refresher of it. In the next video, we're going to see how we're basically going to use all three of those concepts: compound selectors, pseudo classes, and changing the display to make interesting horizontal and vertical navigation bars, just like the ones you would see here. Okay.